everybody. Welcome back to the Unstoppable podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Matthew Gold, co-founder and CEO at Unstoppable Domains, and our guest, Dave Rodman, founder and managing partner at Rodman Law Group. Dave started his career in cannabis law and now is a crypto attorney. So really excited to chat with him more about what it is that he does, as well as about some of the legal issues that we might need to think about in this space moving forward. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer. Dave Rodman is a lawyer, but is not your lawyer. Accordingly, this podcast episode is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or financial advice. The blockchain and cryptocurrency landscape is extremely fluid, and the content addressed today is subject to change with no notice. If you have a specific legal issue, you should retain your own lawyer who has experience in the space. Now, on to our guest. So welcome, Dave. So happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dana. Thank you. And thank you, Matt.
Awesome. So to get us started off, Dave, I'm just wondering, how did you get into the crypto space initially?
Sure. So I think I can't really tell that story without just stating that I'm a cannabis lawyer. And there's a reason for that. Basically, a friend of mine who I'd known for many years called me one night and tried to start to explain to me this thing he was doing. And it turns out that that was an ICO. And as soon as he described it, I immediately thought that it could be used to fund cannabis companies because all of my clients have been banked since 2017. So it's not really a banking issue, but a lending issue, a borrowing issue. It's huge for the industry and it's hard to get funding for new projects. And kind of the way he was describing these things, I was like, wow, each company could like issue their own token, and it would be a way that the regulators couldn't say they couldn't do. So I immediately was like super into it. And obviously that didn't go anywhere. But I was, at that time, I was the only attorney at my firm. And I was working on, I was basically waking up at like 8 a.m. and working till midnight. And this friend of mine was in Thailand. So I would call him or text him or telegram him from maybe 12 to 2. And I was kind of digitally following him around the crypto verse and trying to educate myself and try to understand it at a fundamental level. And then at one point I said to him, and he had a background in finance, I said to him, these things, they seem like they're securities. Have you ever heard of the Howey test? And he said no. And then a couple of days later, maybe a week later, I'm not exactly sure, an article came out in Hacker Noon and basically laid out what the Howey test and what a security was. And that relationship just immediately switched. And he started to follow me around and ask me questions. This is all digitally. And I ended up becoming outside general counsel for that project. And that led to more projects in Asia. We've never looked back. I mean, cannabis is still our biggest practice area, but blockchain and cryptocurrency is our second biggest practice area. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to sit around and think about how the law impacts the industry. And on a personal level, I'm a DeFi degen. I'm playing with all these things all the time. And I'm sure that my wife wishes that it didn't take up as much time in my life as it does. But I find it fascinating. And I trained as a securities lawyer, and I had a background in finance. So it was natural to sort of make this progression into the space.
Yeah, so for you, you already had some of that background coming from a finance and securities law background. But how did you go about learning more about crypto and blockchain? What were some of the resources that you turned to, and would you recommend those resources, or are there newer and better resources these days that you would recommend to people that are beginners to the space and just diving into this for the first time right now?
I think it depends on which part of the space you are talking about, because it is no longer very homogeneous. It's quite diverse. I think that basically, if you want to look at the law side of it, you've got to study securities law, banking law, IP law. If you're just getting into the space fresh, I get asked this a lot, and I obviously start with the white paper, and then from there, I keep telling people, like, I know some really smart people who say, I just don't understand it. And I keep telling them there's not a lot to understand. It's at least just for Bitcoin, which I always start with. It's supply and demand. It's hard money. And once you've finally spent enough time researching it and doing your own diligence, you'll realize that there isn't a lot to understand. But I think there's a fundamental, you got to do it yourself to get comfortable with it aspect to this. For DeFi, I can't recommend enough the Telegram chat, Lobster's DAO. It's really informative and a little snarky, but that's where I mean, every morning I open it up, I check Robinhood, I check coin market cap, and then I look at the between 200 and 1,000 messages from Lobster DAO overnight, and that's how I stay up on things from a operational standpoint, not from a legal standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I like how you simplify that and make it sound a lot less intimidating to get into than a lot of people initially think. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to widespread adoption of crypto and blockchain? Like, what do you see as preventing a lot of people from entering the space besides what you just said, like people make it maybe more complicated than it is?
I honestly think it's a lack of motivation. I was really motivated because a friend of mine was starting a company and I wanted to give him good legal advice. And I bought my first Bitcoin in like 2013. I forgot about it for a couple of years. So there's a certain amount of inquisitiveness that I think you have to have. And if you're not going to do that work, then you're your own worst barrier to it. I think there's plenty of good resources. I think enough big hedge fund managers and insurance companies have jumped in and said they're allocating into, again, we're just sort of talking about Bitcoin. I think you've got to have that passion for it. And I don't think a lot of people do yet. I think they will. I mean, happy $1 trillion day. I think that's huge. And so I think every news spike, I get a group of people who haven't talked to me in a long time or just know that I'm into the space, and they ask me all the same questions. And my response is always, I'm not an investment advisor, and I'm certainly not advising you, but I've put a huge amount of my resources into it on a personal level and at a professional level. Some of our balance sheet at the firm is in crypto and has been for about a year. So, it's put your money where your mouth is. And people who don't pay attention, they're just going to hurt themselves. It's my opinion. They're just going to hurt themselves financially in the long run.
So I'm just curious, what would be your 30-second pitch to somebody who's not in the space about why they should get curious and why they should care?
30 seconds, man. More money has been printed by the United States in the last 2 years than in the entire history of the United States combined. That's going to have serious financial implications. Specifically, people from my generation, which I guess is millennial, we are facing the inability to control our financial destiny. And this is sort of the chance to get in early on something and make some generational wealth. And that's it. That's all I would say. I think that there's people get too hung up, and I was just like that at the beginning on the technology behind it. And I tell people, if you're in this for the financial stuff, you don't necessarily need to know all of the technological components of it. You just need to be comfortable with it and then realize that it's an avenue towards financial freedom. At least if you get in early enough.
Yeah. Well, you actually mentioned a few things earlier, like that got you initially interested. So you came in on the ICOs, which for those at home is an initial coin offering. And a lot of these have been looked at closer to securities as time has gone on. And that was a big rush in 2017. And then you said recently, you're now spending a lot of time in DeFi, right? And like, I have a lot of friends in the space as well, spending time in decentralized finance, playing around with, I call them money games, people playing around with those. And so that, all of that stuff is kind of exciting. Is that still, like, you view that as cutting edge for yourself? Is that the thing that you like to wake up and play with in the space right now, is these decentralized finance protocols?
Absolutely. Although NFTs are slowly kind of edging in on that territory for me, as there's been some new tech in the industry. But yeah, I remember when Instadapp came out, and I was taking screenshots every morning of my interest and showing it to a Telegram group that I'm in, and no one was listening to me. I was like, guys, this is insane. I'm making like 5% every night. And then, that was like, I want to say that was spring of 2019. And then just to see the DeFi summer this year was, bonkers. And I've tried to stay up on it as best I can. And I'll be the first to admit that I wish I had more time to do that. But yes, DeFi is absolutely the most interesting thing to me at the moment from a personal level.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way that like DeFi really took off, and we're actually in the NFT space with our NFT domain names. So we've actually seen people come in here, and we're getting some more interest now that that's picking up. So I'm actually kind of another note here. Unstoppable Domains, we also put crypto on our balance sheet, so you're not the only company out there. We beat Tesla to it, as you guys did, and I think it's a smart thing to do from a financial perspective. But I'm actually curious, why'd you go off and start your own law firm? And then tell us, what are the clients that you have now? Is it mostly blockchain? Is it mostly cannabis industry? And then what kind of clients are you seeing for yourself in the future? Are you guys catering to the space?
Sure. So I started the firm in 2014, and I did some independent contractor work for some other firms in that first year, just kind of here and there. And from there, basically, what happened is the initial cannabis law scene was you'd find all these cannabis lawyers who were deeming themselves corporate lawyers, and all they really were defense attorneys that had a bunch of marijuana clients that then just all of a sudden said they were corporate lawyers. So I came into the space with a finance background, having specialized in securities law and intellectual property law in law school, and I immediately had this huge advantage. And that has since changed. Cannabis has become way more acceptable. But at the time, there weren't many people who could intelligently speak about a securities offering or about the USPTO and how you could get a trademark or you couldn't get a trademark. And so that gave me a niche, and I was able to kind of carve out a nice chunk of the market. My partner joined my firm in 2019. We've known each other since the first week of law school. He's actually how I got into cannabis law, and it was really cool to come full circle to be able to bring him on and to work together. His name's Nadav Ashner. He's probably, without hyperbole, he's probably top 3 cannabis lawyers in the country. So our cannabis practice is still our biggest practice. It's probably 50% of what we do. But crypto is hot on its heels, and with a couple of new clients that have come on in the last couple months, it's our fastest growing practice area. So we're going to continue to practice in our third biggest practice area is hemp and CBD. So we're going to continue to practice in the cannabinoid space. We are pressing up into other scheduled substances as best we can. That's been a passion point for both of us, and we're continuing to foster the crypto practice. I became a Gitcoin kernel Gitcoin kernel mentor this year, which basically was my sort of attempt to give back and provide some broad-based legal education to some really cutting-edge and nascent projects. And that's been super rewarding. I can't speak highly enough about those guys at Kernel. So that's all. It's all in the fostering the direction of increasing our crypto practice.
Yeah, and are there a lot of other firms like you guys out there right now? I can't imagine that. I mean, I haven't personally heard of any crypto or blockchain attorneys out there. So what does the legal market for this space look like right now, and where do you see it kind of developing in the next year or 5 years?
So there definitely are. There's not a lot. I'm fairly confident that there's not any firms in which their 2 biggest practice areas are crypto and cannabis. So I'm pretty proud of that. But there's some of the bigger firms in their IP department and sometimes in their securities department have a crypto practice, but they usually price themselves out of the market because of how expensive they are. And our entire firm is based around working with startups. I mean, the entire cannabis industry is a startup. It's only been around on the Rex side since 2014 in Colorado, and there's plenty of places in the United States where it's not legal yet. So we're fundamentally geared to work with cannabis companies or startup companies, and that has allowed us to penetrate the market in the crypto space.
What have been some of the most common legal issues that you've seen in your clients, or just in the space in general with other lawyers that you've seen? What are some of the most common legal issues in crypto and blockchain that have come up so far?
mean, first and foremost is the securities issue through, from the ICO boom, well, before the ICO boom, but really in the ICO boom and after, the fact that these things really are or were in many cases securities, and they were unregistered securities sales. That's absolutely the biggest issue. The other big one is the failure to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, which I think is huge, and we haven't even begun to see the impacts of it. I believe that there is probably a file being compiled at FinCEN, at DHS, on companies like Uniswap, SushiSwap, Compound. It's just nothing's happened yet. And I usually tell people sort of the same anecdote on this. I think I mentioned it on Pomp's podcast, but we had a client who was arrested in 2019 in connection with the sale of unregistered securities. Now, we didn't represent him on this project, and in fact, we told him not to do it. But it took, when the indictment was unsealed, it turns out that he'd been under investigation since 2015, and that's how long these things take to come to the point where a prosecutor is willing to bring a case. So it's just a matter of time, I think. I also like to talk about the Overton window shifting, and if it shifts fast enough and far enough, then some of these companies might be able to kind of shoot through it and maybe avoid some of the serious regulatory touches, or maybe are big enough where they pay a fine and that's it, sort of the way Robinhood did. There are. You don't mess around with the Patriot Act or the Bank Secrecy Act, and basically everyone in the industry is. So I think we'll see a spate of enforcement actions in maybe 1 or 2 years, unless laws change.
Well, we could also see that sooner. I find that whenever the Bitcoin price goes up too high, the regulators get hot and they try to find something because they feel like they need to, clamp down on the frenzy before it gets too crazy. So specifically on crypto law, I actually kind of want to dive in here. I've got a lot of different topics kind of run through, but one that I'm very interested in is what are developers supposed to do about community controlled websites or DAOs or smart contracts? And I think maybe one of the biggest examples here would be something like Maker, and they have their Maker DAO or something like that. So what can they do to protect themselves better legally if there's, maybe there's just a bug in the code, for instance? I'm actually kind of confused. Who's at fault if there's something wrong with the smart contract that runs up there? If you just wrote it on over the weekend, what can you do to protect yourself, or what should people be thinking about? Because I know right now most developers don't even consider this.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest, one of the biggest things when talking to potential clients and clients in the space is you get these individuals who they're coding the future and they're pushing the limits of what this technology can do, and they don't think about the importance of the everyday run-of-the-mill legal stuff, and they will frequently say, oh, I don't need an entity, or I don't want to incorporate. And I have to talk to them and say, yes, you absolutely do. If you don't, you are personally liable for all of your actions. And if you don't, and there's more than one person, then they're going to impute a general partnership. And by they, I mean either regulators or, more concerningly, private individuals who have been harmed and are being represented by a plaintiff's attorney. And under a general partnership, if Matt, if you and I were general partners, we would both be individually and severally liable for each other's actions and for the actions of the partnership. So if you left the country to a non-extradited jurisdiction, and I was still here, someone with a grievance, if they had damages, they could bring a suit against the partnership and just go after me. And it's my job to find you and kind of bring you back in and recover from you, 50-50, assuming we were equal partners. So there is no current DAO entity, although Wyoming is really trying, and I think that we'll see it here soon, and it'll be a DAO first entity class, because all entities in the states are recognized at the state level, and that's important to remember. So whether it's an LLC, a C Corp, a B Corp, a nonprofit, that's a state designation. And then of course you do make an election with the IRS for taxes, but so if the states come in and say, okay, this is what the statutes say to be a DAO, then that will become a recognized entity. And I hope it happens quickly. Until that happens, I tell all of my clients that if you want to have a DAO, fine, but you need to wrap it in an entity. And whether that's a C Corp or an LLC, there's certainly different approaches to that. But if you wrap it in an entity, then it is the limitation. That entity limits the liability of the shareholders or the members in the case of an LLC. That doesn't limit criminal liability. So if you've breached the Bank Secrecy Act, or FinCEN's knocking at your door, or the CFTC or the SEC is knocking at your door, they can absolutely go through and get the principles on criminal issues. But it's that civil limitation where if someone sues, like Ripple, Ripple violated the 33 Act and the 34 Act, and the SEC is going after them. But then a bunch of private individuals are using that as a platform to bring a private right of recovery against Ripple. And that could be massive. So if you don't have a limitation of liability through a corporate form, you open yourself up personally to having to pay restitution. All of your assets could be seized. So I can't stress it enough how important it is to have an entity.
So I had a follow-up there. You actually mentioned Wyoming, and I'm actually kind of curious for legislatures out there, what could they do to make this actually easier? I'm actually, what could they do? Like if someone out there is listening and they're like, I want to make my state, a more competitive state for all this blockchain technology. What is Wyoming doing that's special that you think could be helpful for people trying to be entrepreneurs in this space?
Well, that's a really broad category because Wyoming is doing a lot of things and a lot of parts of crypto. But to your specific question, for DAOs, Wyoming is in the process of passing legislation that will make a DAO, and I don't exactly know how they're defining it. They're kind of I don't know if a lot of people know this or not, but LLCs were created in Wyoming, so Wyoming has a history of innovating here. So they're creating a DAO-centric, DAO-first entity classification. It'll function. I believe it'll function like an LLC, but it'll be specifically DAO in nature. And I think that every state should be adopting some form of this because it pays to incentivize the people who are in the space, and it pays to give them some protections so that they can continue to innovate.
So how would this protect me if I wanted to launch like a smart contract up on a blockchain with two of my friends over the weekend? I'm actually just like, how would this actually work in practice, or how do you think it would work in Wyoming? Let's assume that they passed it.
Well, from what I can tell, it would work exactly as if you incorporated an LLC. It's just instead of having membership interests, it's going to be controlled by either, I believe they're talking about multi-sig wallets. But everybody's going to approach this differently. So what the end result is, it protect whatever your smart contracts does, your business, it will protect you and your friends who coded it from. Take out the crypto part. You guys start a lawn mowing company. If you're an LLC and somebody slips and falls at your location, or you mess up somebody's yard and they want to sue you, they can only sue your company and recover against the assets that you have put into that company. They can't go after your house. If you were just mowing lawns and you ran over someone's foot and they brought a personal injury suit against you, they could recover against your entire net worth. So regardless of whether or not it actually becomes a DAO, recognized by the state, or it's a DAO that has an LLC or a C Corp wrapper, it protects your assets and everything that you own that's not in the company. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And it actually just sounds like regulation just catching up with new technology. And I'm glad to hear that there's some forward-thinking states out there taking a look, because we want entrepreneurship to happen here on shore in the US, not somewhere else. And by doing things like that, we make that a lot easier. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm actually kind of curious. Stablecoins have been in the air, right, the past year or two. I'd love to get your opinion on that. I think that the Stables Act that came out recently was pretty interesting, and kind of the implications around stable coins. And then, Facebook, they had a stable coin that kind of got put on hold for a little while. So I'm actually, what's your overall thoughts? I know stable coins have a lot of issues with regards to privacy and other areas like that, but what's your thoughts on the Stables Act, and where do you see that going in the U.S. in the next couple of years?
Well, hopefully the Stable Act doesn't go anywhere as written. I can understand where. I think my opinion of the Stable Act was that a bunch of well-intentioned representatives wanted to get ahead of Facebook on something and didn't really consider too much the sort of collateral damage to the existing players in the market. That's sort of a high-level take on it. I don't think it was well thought out. I don't think it was industry friendly, and I think that I hope it never makes it out of the house. I think that we'd all be deluding ourselves to think that stable coins will not be regulated. It's just a matter of time and how. I think that the concern here is it was sort of that they kind of came out at the same time, the Stable Act and then FinCEN's proposed rulemaking that has been put on hold, thank God. The fact that these things were created for a non-distributed ledger world, there are some things like the Howey test in the securities realm. There's a reason why it's so vague. It hasn't had to change much over the years. It's super flexible and it works, and it largely works in the crypto space. I mean, there's going to be some arguments that we need to update it, and I'm certainly one of the people who argue that. But largely, if you have an investment in a common enterprise in which the profits are to be derived by other people, that's a security. So, but when it comes to money and it comes to trying to put these old banking rules onto this new system, it just doesn't work. You can't KYC a smart contract. There might not actually be a human behind it, and a lot of DeFi is built around that. So if the centralized stablecoin providers are forced to stop working, they can basically blacklist Uniswap, and that would have really significant impact on the DeFi market. And then you have the non-centralized stablecoins, the biggest obviously being DAI, but a huge amount of Tether and USDC is locked up in the DAI contracts, and so there would be these bang-on effects. I'm hoping that a good balance can be struck where the regulators who are concerned about tax evasion and terrorism financing. I mean, Janet Yellen said that in her one of her first public addresses, that they can get comfortable with what these things are, and they don't overregulate and just kind of try to mash what is clearly a different system into the archaic SWIFT system and regular payment system that we have now, because it's just not going to work. Did I even come close to answering your question? I feel like I want to tangent there.
No, I think you did. I think you did great. And for people at home, so you covered a lot of topics there. You're basically saying that, if someone's going to be issuing a token that's 1-for-1 to the dollar, I agree with you 100%. Regulators are going to be very curious about that because they're not going to want people to get hurt. And then we have all sorts of different classes of these stable tokens, Tether, USDC, DAI, that are all different ways of trying to make a one-to-one stable coin pegged back to the US dollars. And then the thing is if they start making regulation here without talking to the right people, Coin Center, other different lobby groups from the crypto industry to understand, hey, there's some things that you're interacting with that are smart contracts. They're not actually entities. They could end up blacklisting whole groups of applications by accident, like Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange that people use at home. So I agree with you. Regulating too early or before you have all the information, definitely a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, and former Secretary Mnuchin was just completely underhanded in his drive to get that FinCEN rulemaking passed over the holidays. And it was really cool to see the number of people in the industry who submitted comments and basically froze the application process. And then Biden became president and it got frozen even further. So I think that was a really important moment for the industry.
Yeah, and so one big issue that came up, with Internet 2.0, and that is undoubtedly going to come up with Web 3.0, is privacy. And so with the internet we have now, GDPR, CCPA, we've got these things protecting the user's privacy. But looking forward to when we're on the decentralized web, how do you see privacy being protected there?
Well, so you can't have this conversation without talking about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And it's only a matter of time. China's already got the DCEP out in, I don't know how many people are using it, but it's not insignificant. And that's where we really do need some progressive legislation. And we need people who know what they're talking about to draft that legislation, because you never ever hear of any government not opting for the surveillance option. You give them the option to take whether or not to use a tool that will allow them greater surveillance ability. They never say no. So the fear here is that because everything is on a ledger, every transaction you ever make is discoverable by at least the government and perhaps third parties or malicious actors if it's hacked. I think that I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody involved in the Stable Act who actually mentioned this, and it was really, that was like the one aspect that I thought that they might be trying to address correctly, is to make sure that privacy is baked in from the start with CBDCs. And if they don't, we are going to be in a incredibly dystopian surveillance state. There's no way around it.
And how do you see, I guess, regulations being put in place to prevent people from, spewing hate, or, we talked about this before we started recording, but it goes beyond just the free speech element of it. There's obviously you're concerned about people going on the decentralized web and saying crazy stuff, but almost above that, you're concerned about, kiddie porn and people posting things like that. So how do we make sure that things like that don't happen and don't get out of control on the decentralized web?
I don't have a good answer for you. That is an issue that has been plaguing me for a while. Once something's on the blockchain, you can't take it off. I know that you can mess with APIs for viewing and stuff like that. So where it touches a centralized arm of society, I think there might be a way to sort of limit the damage. But we don't have a good track record with technology like this. Just look at 4chan and 8chan and 8kun and all the violence that has been incited there. It keeps me up at night, because this area has so much promise, and it could go so well, but it also has the potential to go really badly. And then there's not really like a retroactive way that I'm aware of, and I'm not a tech guy, to deal with some of these things. So I don't mean to punt on your question, but I just know that it's something that I am thinking about, and I think that anybody in the space who cares about it should be thinking about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm right there with you. And it's this tough balance, because on the one hand, you really do have to be worried about making digital currencies that are 100% trackable, because there's a lot of countries out there that are pretty autocratic, and you could end up in a very weird 1984 situation. And on the other hand, you do have this community need for ensuring that we have safe spaces for people to be online if they need them. And we have this already in our filters. The internet is already full of terrible things all over the place, and there are different people at different levels that help kind of, when you search on Google, you're not going to find things that you shouldn't be finding. In most cases, they're scrubbing it for you. So we have frameworks for this on the traditional web. I think they're going to carry over to the decentralized web, but the new challenge is all of this things around finance, because that just makes it so much harder for people to wrap their heads around the potential implications. On to other maybe more interesting and less gloomy topics. I'm actually kind of curious about your take on NFTs. So NFT world, non-fungible tokens have just actually blown up in the last 6-8 months, kind of like DeFi did last summer. And so I think that there's all sorts of issues that could go around with NFTs. And I'm actually kind of curious, what are the things that you're seeing that are of particular interest for you in this space right now?
Yeah, so NFTs are definitely blowing up, and I think they raise some novel issues that haven't really been raised too much crypto yet. You've got some projects that are storing data on chain, which I think comes back to what we were just talking about and the concerns there about violence and child pornography and violation of trademark. And then, so that's one component of it. We have a client that's in that space. They're putting everything on chain. They're called Avastars. It's very cool. It's not just metadata. They're actually putting all of the digital information for art on chain through Arweave. So that's sort of the art side of things. And then we have another client called Charged Particles that created a way to basically take an NFT and allow it to hold ERC20 tokens or other NFTs. And that is really exciting because I think that will be the avenue, or maybe something like it, that will allow for the first on-chain bond issuance. And I think that's going to be super cool and super powerful. So I think the financial side of the NFT markets, not just like how much they're worth. I mean, the actual like tech is super interesting and has a lot of value. And there's in a lot of sense, there's less concern around those tokens as far as SEC type regulation because they're non-fungible. They're a sale. It's like selling a product. If the price of, excluding kind of things like crypto punks where one goes up but they all go up, that's a different mechanism. But if you have a bunch of NFTs on your balance sheet and you're selling them to people, the price of the NFT in the market isn't what's causing your balance sheet NFTs to increase in value. Whereas if you were selling an ERC20 token and the price went up there, your balance sheet value goes up. So I think that it makes my job a little bit easier from a regulatory standpoint. But then there's the counterpoint of stuff being stored on chain and how that works, enforcing trademark, invoice sales tax. I mean, there's a reason why freeholds exist for the sale of traditional art. It's only a matter of time until the IRS starts to pay really close attention to the sale of high value crypto art. So where's that sale taking place? I mean, there's some existing precedent from the traditional web, but I think it's skewed enough where we might need some new guidance. So the NFT market never ceases to amaze me. It's moving quickly. Names of people who you never thought would get involved in it are getting involved in it, and I think that that companies are recognizing the value of it much faster than they recognize the value of just traditional crypto. In that, I mean, look at the NBA. Look what they're doing. Mark Cuban is all over this shit.
Yeah, Mark Cuban is a avid collector in baseball cards, I think he mentioned. And so for him, I think it was just an instant trigger in his head, like, oh, this is exactly what this is for. And NBA Top Shots has been super hot. We've talked about them a few times on here before. You mentioned something I want to dig into, though, and it's kind of like a cross between NFTs, these non-fungible tokens, and then this finance component, the decentralized finance part. So could you tell me a little bit more? Because I actually I didn't quite fully understand that. So people are actually using NFTs you think that they could be used for bond issuance or for lending? I'm actually, how would that work? Take me through it. I'm curious.
So the way this particular client's project works is you can take a piece of, right now, you take a piece of art and you can go onto their platform and you can charge it up with something like A DAI or C DAI. And so as you can sell that, and as long as it exists, or unless you end up, I think they call it melting it, but destroying it, it gives you the right to receive that interest. So that's just it's a very small use case right now. You're just putting real dollar value, not just intrinsic value, onto a piece of art. But the guys who created it, when they first told me about it, I initially was like, this could be a way to have interest be issued on chain. So that immediately made me think of bonds. Alternatively, I think that with some kind of flexibility, it might be a way to secure promissory notes, individual debt. I haven't really worked it out exactly how that would work, but it just seems like to me that there's a way to lock up capital and to have it spew out an income stream. Therefore, could be used to better secure debts at the personal level. So I think that the use cases, I mean, they just launched on Wednesday, and they've only been around for like a couple months in development. So I think that the use cases there are yet to be fully plumbed. But yeah, just think of it as an NFT that can basically function as a wallet. So the applications are endless there, and then you could tokenize that. I mean, it's sort of the Ouroboros of crypto. Putting tokens into something and then tokenizing it, and I think that the possibilities are endless, and I'm super excited about it.
I can tell the wheels are spinning up there for you. Like you have the legal mind behind there. You're like, what can I do with all these new ways that people can interact with each other? So I'll definitely go check that out. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I hadn't launched on Wednesday. I hadn't seen that yet, so I'm going to go check out the Charged Particles project. And so then I guess on a personal level, like, what was it that drew you into decentralized finance? I do feel like this is the realization of the dream of open finance for everyone that we've been speaking of for a long time. And we're here in the US, so we sometimes neglect to understand like how impactful this can be at other places. But if you look more broadly, just outside of our little world here in the US, what's your thoughts on decentralized finance for maybe emerging markets or globally for other people around the world?
Yeah, I mean, look at Africa. They skip the landline, as people are like to say. Went right to mobile, and I think the same thing is happening with finance. They're skipping TradFi and going to DeFi. I mean, I read that I think Nigeria now has the highest percentage of Bitcoin ownership in the world, and that's amazing. So, and then you have use cases like Argentina, where there's capital controls, and people or Venezuela. I mean, people's money is disappearing, and so when you give them an opt out and into something that is kind of uncontrollable and can basically function as sound money, again, kind of falling back to just talking about Bitcoin, I don't think anybody in the United States appreciates that. Going back to earlier when I said I thought the biggest barrier to adoption was people's lack of interest or lack of motivation. That's a first world American style problem, at least for now. We'll see what happens with inflation. But in other countries, it is a life and death issue for people, and feeding their family versus not. So people are motivated, and they are understanding it, and they are taking advantage of it, which is fantastic. And I think we've been talking about, as you said, the democratization of finance since early 2000. Well, I mean, I guess with when Bitcoin first started to get adopted, but like really, you started to hear it as a buzzword in like 2016, 2017. And I think with DeFi, we're not quite there, but we're getting there. And I think that it has a true path to viability. I mean, look at what you would get on yield on a bond in the real world versus what you could lock up in Compound and earn on or get a Gemini dollar and put it on BlockFi. I mean, I'm earning 8.7% on my GUSD, and yeah, it's sort of a CFI product, but there's all of these things in the DeFi space, and you can just go and use them, and you can crush your yield compared to what you'd get in the regular financial world. So that's what grabbed me. It was, look at this. This is amazing. It's something of value that we can actually access as just regular individuals, as long as you understand the tech to a certain degree. You don't need to go through a middleman. There's no broker. It's get out there and earn, and that is really appealing, I think.
All right, Dave. So for this last segment, we call this Explain Your Tweet. This is where I dig through your Twitter account, pull out some interesting or cryptic or funny tweets that you've made. So most of the stuff on your company Twitter account is pretty much the stuff that we talked about. It's, regulations and things that people can go look at to get more educated on the space, on the legal ramifications of things that are happening. But I did find something on your personal Twitter that I thought was interesting. This was from, this is good. This is from late last year. You tweeted about a piece of digital art, an NFT that you purchased, and it's this lion paint, this like mirror or water lion painting thing. Yeah. And you bought this as a piece of digital art. And I wanted to call this out because you actually turned this piece of digital art into physical art that looks like it's hanging in your house or hanging somewhere.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how did you go about doing that? Because I think a lot of people still have a hard time wrapping their minds around all of these digital assets. And, why would I spend money for a digital piece of art? Like, I can't even see it. I can't even show my friends when they come over. I can't do anything with it. And so you've shown them that when you buy digital art, you actually can turn it into physical art that you can look at every day. So how did you turn this digital piece of art into physical art?
So it actually, I was trying to explain NFTs to my wife, and she didn't get it. And so we went on to, I want to say Rarible, and we were looking at these things. And I said, we could buy these. And then she said, what are we going to do with them? And I tried to explain that you could put it on in a digital space, like on crypto voxels and stuff like that. And then I was like, I know that there is some way to do this. And I just Googled digital picture frame, and I came up with one. I said, look, let's buy this picture frame, and we'll buy this little NFT. And she immediately, it clicked for her. She got it. And we immediately, we came in the mail, we loaded the NFT onto it, and it's sitting on our wall. And I plan on putting some in the office as soon as I get around to it. So it was just a way to kind of, it really started as a way to educate my wife about it and about the newer stuff that we were doing at the firm. And then it was sort of like a no-brainer when we kind of sort of ended up pulling the trigger on it.
Yeah, and just so for people listening, the piece of art that you bought, it has like some sort of effects, like ripple effects. So it's a moving piece of art. So for people listening, it's not like he just, went on Google Images and downloaded this image of a lion and printed it out and put it in a frame. This is actually a moving piece of art that he put in a digital frame that's hanging up. So there are very tangible things that you can do with NFTs beyond just storing them in your digital wallet or digital collectibles or anything like that. So really cool, Dave. I'm really glad I came upon that because this is something that I've been thinking about, and it's a great way to make this relatable to the masses. So.
Yeah, and I think that's what really hooked my wife, was the fact that it was it happened to be moving. I mean, it's a cool picture, but the fact that it had this animated component to it that you could only do digitally is what sealed the deal and what made her get on board with it. So that was it. And I think the next, what we're seeing right now is we're starting to see audio and video artists get into this and start to put like real, like full length music tracks on as NFTs. And I believe it's only a matter of time until we get a full length movie as an NFT. I mean, right now we're talking about video length, and I think that's awesome. And it's really cool to see artists like Blau and Grammatic do stuff like this. It's fantastic.
Well, that was inspiring, Dave. I appreciate it. I now have a new project for myself, which is to buy a digital picture frame and then display some NFT art on my desk. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that it's a good showpiece. So thanks again for coming on and walking us through all these legal areas here. I think we covered a lot of good areas. We talked a little bit about how regulators can make this easier for entrepreneurs in the space. There's some good laws that they could open up on the downside. We touched on a lot of these DeFi projects and how they should be concerned about potential regulation coming their way. It takes time for these people to work their way through. We talked about NFTs, which is near and dear to my heart. Some of the DeFi projects you're following in the space, some of these newer ones, and we ended it with a beautiful picture of the lion. So I appreciate that. When we're closing up here, how about plug yourself? Tell us about where can people find you? They can learn more about you guys and follow along if they'd like to stay up to date with legal happenings in the crypto and blockchain space.
Sure. Well, I'll do it a little differently than I would normally, given where we are right now. We actually have a decentralized, very small, very minimal website that we've got at .crypto. So you can find it. I think it's at rodmanlaw.crypto, rodmanlaw.eth. But in the real world, or the traditional world, I should say, www.therodmanlawgroup.com. You can ping us on Twitter at Rodman Law. And reach out to us on email, info@therodmanlawgroup.com. And we're active. Like I said, this is like the coolest place to be in right now. So we're really excited to be helping people realize their full dreams in the space with whatever project they're doing. And we've got a huge range of projects within the space. So I'm always excited to see the ones that I haven't seen before, though.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you being here, Dave. Everybody go follow Dave to stay up to date. Go check out his website on the decentralized web if you've got the extension. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll be back again soon with another episode of the Unstoppable podcast.
Thanks, guys.